Got it. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Daisy here. I'm so glad to have everyone with me today. Over the past few days, seen parents logging in diligently. Many of you are driving. So today I will make a note to try to verbalize out some of the words that could be a little bit small for you. And today's session, I have a little bit more time with you from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. For those who have not gotten any food, maybe it's time to order some grab along the way first. After all, this is a brown bag series. Okay, so today's conversation on mini workshop is it's like a casual overview on selecting the best fit primary school. And by the time your child is born, you're thinking about educating your child and primary school inevitably come into the picture. And this is one of our most common, most debatable, most worrying topic all parents have on the mind. Even after the kids are going to primary school, I still have parents coming to us to have this conversation. And why is that so? So today I'll be sharing this with you. I'm going to go into stress screen first. So today I'm talking about the selecting the best fit primary school. Okay, so today's agenda will be on the Malaysia education landscape to give you a little overview of what's going on here in Malaysia. Why does it confuse people so much? And preparing for primary school and the entrance exam, the whole primary school, you have to prepare for it. And then what happens in primary school? Because knowing ahead what happens really, prepare us for what to do now. I mean, that's would be really helpful if someone tell me what happens after I have 3 kids. What really happens? I'll be more prepared than now. Okay, so today's agenda is on these 3 topics. And in Malaysia, actually, you guys are a lot luckier than us in Singapore. You have a lot of choices over here. We have the public schooling, national curriculum that many of you are very familiar with. And in the last 10 years, the number of international schools have really increased tremendously. Now we have over 200 schools for you as a choice. And then we'll be going through, to go over a little bit more on the international schools, various curriculum, because many parents are confused. So if they want to make a real comparison, you want to make a choice, you kind of want to know what it's really about. Yeah. So in national school, you have public school, your SK, SGKC for primary school, we're talking about primary school here. And then you have the private schools, private institutions, but offering the national curriculum. And then that's international schools, who are really, schools that are not adopting the national curriculum, Bahasa as the main language of teaching. That's, you can apply for international school. Yeah. And then there's the learning centers, the home schooling and all this that I'm not really going to be talking about today. Okay, so going to Malaysia education landscape, finding the perfect school for your child and your family, because your child will be spending many hours there, and your interaction with the teacher, the school, inevitably will have an influence on your family time. Okay, so types of schools. I'm having a chart here that probably from a perspective that most parents are familiar with. Let's talk about the pathway. So in primary school, there are many types of exams. There's a public school have the UPSR. In the international schools, they may be doing the Cambridge primary checkpoints. IB doesn't have a checkpoint in primary school. That's the curriculum they'll be following. Now, secondary, you are familiar with PT3, SPM. Then the equivalent will be the British curriculum of O levels. Then there's IB. Again, there's no checkpoint at this juncture. Now there's pre-U, but you're familiar STPM, a diploma. Then for the UK version, there's the A levels. Then there's also the Australian version, and then there's IB. Some parents kind of already have a checkpoint in mind. It's really surprised me, but they have a checkpoint in mind for pre-U because they know where they want their kid to go for overseas or locally, and they already have some preconceived notion which one is easier to score, to do well in, and they kind of work backwards of you, like, doesn't matter, I can still go for my Australian ADP now later on. So I just want my kid to have a certain kind of cultural exposure at this point. Yeah. But, in this very exam-centric format that we are very used to, and then some of us may have an unfortunate incident that we really took to heart. For instance, what happened? Unfortunately, you missed the exam, a very key exam that day. because the pathway hinges step by step on exams. So if you miss a certain exam, then it can have a big impact on the overall grades. And over the years, some exams has really like moved away from having one giant big exam and try to break it down into coursework assessment, etc., and various ways to assess your child, because exam is not a very complete way for a child to learn and for us to assess how well a child is learning or doing. Yeah, so some schools have adopted this. So be sure to try to take a note of what exams, what note or checkpoints the school will be using for your child. Okay, now exams aside, the next thing is the E word, exposure. Yes, okay, so exposure and exams are very different. Exam is the day you take the exam, the paper, but day to day, what will your child be exposed to? Now in SK, the exam is the KSSR exam, the syllabus is the KSSR, the exam is the UPSR, and is the exam itself with about 3/4 of the subjects will be in written Bahasa. Likewise, for SJKC, 3/4 of the exams will be in Chinese. Now, the day-to-day exposure will be a lot higher in these languages. Curriculum on paper may look like it's very diversified, it's more all-rounded, but the day-to-day exposure, because maybe we'll go through later on teachers and teaching method, the day-to-day conversation may have more of one language. Some parents want this, some parents don't want this, but exposures versus exam is quite different. Now, you may want your child to have that really, really high exposure to counter the exposure, the lower exposure you have at home for that language. But, maybe your child's dominant language is not that, and the exam being only in that language can affect how the child perform, the actual outcome. Yeah, okay. So then for international school, we have IPC, CPE for their syllabus, and there are private schools who adopt the KSSR, the national curriculum, but their UPSR exam often offers the choice of writing and doing it in English. Like, subject will be English. Like for instance, science and math, offer it in English. And only for national schools who are able to adopt the DLP, dual language program. I'll go through that a little bit later on. Some of you are familiar with the DLP because I have parents who are rather young, in the 20s. Probably your school adopted DLP when you were in school. Then they stopped that for a while. That means the ability for public school to offer English, a subject in English, not just English in English. So then your child will have a more balanced exposure to the languages instead of just dominantly one. So then you may be more conversant in English, even though you may tell me, oh, I'm a SC grad, but I was from DLP school. So I took my science and my math in English. So today, in today's world, actually the number of DLP schools have reduced. And we'll go through a little bit on why it has actually reduced. So which is why it does affect our parents today on their choices for choosing a public school, because the choices of DLP school have reduced. So on national curriculum, is nationally, MOE set a curriculum and guideline on subjects, syllabus, and etc. Schools following public school have to follow this to a T. Even right now, to when MOE announced, okay, from now on, you guys have to wear black shoes, white shoes, black shoes. Standard ones will start in March. All of these dictations will have to be followed to a T by the public school. And they take the KSSR syllabus, they take the UPSR exam. For now, because of COVID, they have suspended the UPSR exam. Now, the whole way of teaching is very centric on exam for like mid-year, end of year, 12. So then every term, there's end of term checkpoint. So there's 12 weeks in the term or 10 weeks in the term. 2-3 weeks is for exam. Then there's revision. Then there's teaching. Taking away the exam can leave a void and gap that schools are still adjusting to, because there is no guideline on what's to fill the gap. What other forms of assessing how the child is doing? So schools have to all find their own footing to adapt. And DLP is a dual language schools whereby math, science, all key science subjects have to be taught in English, because this is deemed as one of the reasons why these subjects could be a little bit weaker. So in a push for more STEM, they would like for these future subjects. So there was a push for DLP program to return. Now, today, there aren't many schools that adopted the DLP because they have to fulfill 4 conditions for public schools. School must be competent, okay, and then they must have enough resources to offer these subjects in English. So they must also have the demand and the support from parents. So if you start and then you are not really offer clarity and certainty, sometimes you may not have enough parents who request this, as long because they would prefer certainty and stability in the school to begin with. So I mean, there are some schools that are offering the DLP program. Do check with your schools before you apply if this is important for you. Okay, so a little bit on private schools offering national curriculum. Why is it that they are more likely to have the resources because parents are paying school fees? They could have more resources to hire teachers to offer some of these like future subjects in English, and they may not be using the national books. So they could be making everyone buy a set of textbooks, like they could be using the same as the Oxford Science. They could be using resources from various places and using that to teach your child. So even if the teaching method is similar, but the material, the curriculum is different. So then the child is learning different kind of materials in this kind of environment. So then some parents often ask me, why do I want to pay more school fees for national curriculum versus, in the private school? The thing is that, right, I don't think there's fundamentally anything wrong in the national curriculum. Yeah, but maybe some enhancement is required and needed. So in a public school, maybe they don't have enough resources because public schools are ranked according to cluster school, performance school. So we usually recommend if you're applying for public school, you should go for a higher ranking one because they get the first access to the funding and the resources. Then you find that it really, really matters in how well the school is run, and your day-to-day, the child's day-to-day life will be so much more pleasant. There's also more stability. Now, in a private school environment, because parents are paying school fees, you find that besides the facilities and whatnot, they're probably able to enhance and add on to the national curriculum. Now, the end checkpoint, that means that the paper or the license that your child will be will be graduating with, obviously is a national certification. But the journey, the experience along the way is just a little bit different, more different. On international schools, a lot of words here, don't worry. I have only highlighted 2 main syllabus, which is the British schools offering the Cambridge exam and the IB schools. Now, IB schools have always generated a lot of interest in our parents. They're very familiar with the British school because Malaysia's education kind of built upon the British style, whereby you have subjects and then children are expected to take a set of subjects every year. And the number of subjects will increase as the child grows older. And then you have like a primary checkpoint, you have a secondary checkpoint, you have a pre-U checkpoint. It's very similar. So you can, for those who move from a public school curriculum into an international school, one of the comfort zone is to go into a British school because it's very similar kind of, as long as it's exam-centric, the teaching method will be similar. Teachers are working towards the same outcome, the goal. We have this exam, so we work backwards to teach backwards, etc., etc. I mean, I'm a student of like a Cambridge system kind of in Singapore, so I'm very used to like, oh, what's the goal? What is our content that we'll be testing and assessing, and then we work backwards to prepare. So this is the kind of training that children will be used to receiving. Now, IB is very different. And it intrigued many of our parents, but whether they took the leap in the end is another matter. IB is really training a school of thought. So in American style, it's quite similar, American curriculum. In the early years or in the primary years, the number of subjects is interdisciplinary. Yeah. And then so we'll be teaching like math and probably not math, but science and social science together, history together. So you want to have the kids to be very interested, and they'll be training like inquiry learning, getting a child to frame the situation, to ask the question, to find the answer. And hence, along the way, it's probably really hard to be assessing your child and having an exam, scoring system. So IB delay the checkpoint and the way later. And the checkpoint, at the end, the pre-checkpoint is actually essay-based. So is quite foreign for many parents, coming from a Malaysian education system or British education system. And along the way, and then, just feel like, oh, a lack of control, but I don't know how well my child is doing. Maybe I'll just add on the tuition anyway. But what do we get tuition for? Because it's interdisciplinary, so it's quite a big jump. But it's very interesting because if you visit the school, many parents will tell me that they love it because the kids are very active and lively in the way they're approaching an issue, and they kind of like how what they observe. It's just the curriculum do have a strong influence on what kind of how your child behaves in terms of when they see something, they approach something. So these are the ways, the differences of the different curriculums. But this is just a glimpse and an overview because there's 200 over schools. I'm not going to be going through the different types of the curriculum, but just two main ones that many families are interested in. Okay, so this is my passion topic. We always talk about the future because it's about future proving our children. You see, there are many subjects that are very important nowadays, such as coding. It's not just about languages. I think languages is really, really important. But there are also apps that help us translate on the go. Okay, but coding, creativity, individuality, as with the AI, what really differentiates you is really you yourself. You can be the only one who can surpass what's going on. And then we can't teach individuality. And often me and my human resource colleagues, we're talking about how do we teach the X factor? How do we train the X factor, the problem solving technique? We can't, the person with the X factor is there. Somewhere along the way, the X factor is either enhanced or diminished by the system or us, parents. Yeah. So now none of the school, public school or private school or national or international curriculum have this future readiness kind of skills and subjects in their curriculum. None of them. We don't have that in Malaysia. Some international schools try to offer some here and there, but we don't have that here. So regardless of what you choose, I'm telling you these are super important, and it's very important for you to be incorporating this into your kids. Individuality, critical thinking, and creativity. Coding is a very, 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 very important subject I cannot stress enough. So nature versus nurture, which is more important? So if you have attended my social emotional development video, then we talk about the personality and the character of a child. You think about nature as the character of a child. Then I mentioned that a child is born with a character, and then we slowly start to see, the shape of our child's character. Now, personality is more likely to be changed according to situation. Some situation can really change the person, or some drastic event change the person. But personality can also vary to a certain degree in different situations. This person can be more talkative in this environment, but really quiet in another. The personality can be, the behavior can change, and this comes with nurturing. So both are important, which is why we need to remember when it comes to selecting a school, because your child may have a personality. Some parents feel like, my child is really rigid, very straightforward, very rule follower. I want to shake him up a little. If you're the kind of parents who like to shake things up a little, okay? But some parents are like, oh, my child is really, really, really very quiet. I want him to stay really quiet, following the rules and etc. So then nature versus nurture, what is more important depends on each family. Here's a little quiz. I want you to have a food for thought now. So school have an influence on personality, right? So when I read this person's personality out, I want you to try to guess what school this person go to. You don't need to tell me out loud, okay? Person A, straight A student, take notes, does not ask questions or speak up in meetings, okay? Wait for your instruction before they proceed, okay? And always consider the pros and cons, think through everything first to try to decide what is it the best outcome before I proceed. What's the safest thing to do? Person A. Okay, any school in mind? Keep it in your mind first. Person B, learn very fast, less likely to finish listening to instruction or read manual. Just do it. can get into trouble at school or work because this person likes to follow their own way of doing things rather than following everyone else. What kind of school? Keep in your head. Person C, excellent communication skill. May not be detail oriented, but it's very creative, very eloquent, likes novelty, likes new things, has difficulty seeing tasks through, but with encouragement can see things through. Ideas are not mature or realized because of lack of tenacity. Your environment must be right and must be ready so that this person can perform. Yeah? What kind of personality? I'm going to go to the next page, but there's no answer. Because every child may be slightly different. To say that the school has an influence on the child's personality, yes. Many of us may have a certain school in mind. That's called stereotyping. And stereotype is probably true to a certain extent because of this. Now, education is the stock of knowledge that we have. We know we have our national curriculum, international curriculum, etc. But it's also the experience we go through. What kind of experience is it on a day-to-day basis that can shape what our view of the world is, shape our behavior? Because if we take this action, was it a result of sculpting over the years? Yeah, then we learn to apply again. Now, the school, with its philosophy and its teaching method, is individually makes up the school. So this can have an influence on our child. Now, generally, the type of school, the type of education can have what a stereotype. Now, some parents may say, oh my God, if I send my child to an international school, he or she is going to be so spoiled. She cannot see things through, etc. Is that necessarily true for only international school kids? Because I think that, probably that, the same goes for when we experienced our young colleagues in our workforce and you coming in, maybe you can ask them, what school did she go to? Just to be sure whether that's really true, make it less resilient. Because some parents will tell me public school is character building. It makes them tough. It's because, the environment is really tough. Hence, after they have been through this, they are just much tougher. Well, I want to talk about the stock of knowledge versus skills because we talk about education is based on the stock of knowledge. Now, this is very true, especially, if you believe that, oh, I must learn this first before I can talk about it. I must learn this first, take the exam, pass, then I can become an accountant, a lawyer. That's true. You really need that. But apart from that, outside school life, do you still hold that belief to be true? That you do anything until you think you have mastered it, then you're an expert in it, then you feel confident to do it. But how about the skills and ability to learn is, I'm a quick learner. I can pick things up really quickly and I can apply it. We are now describing this as street smart, street smart or high EQ, which is more important. Now, what we have learned during COVID times is that stock of knowledge during that period of time was less important than the ability to adapt, to learn new things very quickly and, change according to your environment. Now, regardless of what education system you were in, but what really differentiates thrivers from people who were not thriving during COVID was the ability, the skill set. Okay, so if that period of time has a strong impact on you, then do think about what kind of catastrophe may be striking in our kids' future and what kind of skill set, what kind of personality do you want our child to have? The Suzuki belief is a very simple one. The Suzuki belief, it believes that, every child, every person, everybody, any one of us can learn a mother tongue. So if you have born in Japan, you can learn Japanese. You're born in China, you can learn Chinese. Okay? And hence also everybody can learn a musical instrument. He did extend it that far. Okay, so now the thing is everybody can learn a mother tongue. What's the magic here? The magic here is expectation. Yeah, you are Japanese, you're born in Japan. There's no other way. I don't know Japanese. I just don't feel like learning Japanese. Okay. So there's no other way, no other excuse. It's not accepted. It's expected you learn. So the moment you set the expectation, I mean, mention this in social development workshop the other day. The moment you set an expectation, your child will follow. Yeah, it's like set a GPS, your car should follow and bring you there. Suzuki believes that if you set an expectation that anybody can learn, your child can learn this thing, the child can learn. So before we learn about, you talk about, can my child go to Chinese school and learn Chinese? Yes, I always say yes, but you must really believe. But if you cannot, do you really want it? I was just like listening to this mom the other day. She was just offering her child something the child wants. Do you want it? Are you sure you want it? You really sure you don't want the other one? Last chance, okay, before mommy pay. If you keep casting doubt, it confuses the child. Okay. I was doing my hypnotherapy certification just a little while back because we have to, it's talking about how to fix or change a belief system. And the interesting thing is that a lot of this flawed belief were actually imposed and given before the child is 7 years old. Because back then, before during the period where the child is 7 years old and below, the child just accept. There's no logical deduction. That doesn't sound right or what. You just accept. So it becomes part of the belief system. If you believe your child can learn, your child can. Then don't go backwards and ask them, you sure you can? Yeah. So identifying the perfect school is really a simple function of find whether you have a school whereby the philosophy you agree with the school. In terms of curriculum, I place it second, but quite a high weight. Okay, so A, B, and C are like the weight you place to this factor. Then the teaching method, then also practically the location, the proximity, the cost of education. Some parents place facilities as very key important. I've got this mom who told me she wants to look for clean toilets. So okay, so then the child's personality, learning style. Then others are, your individual factors. So if you want, you can print screen this. Otherwise, we'll be sharing this online. These are just a little function or equation for you to be looking at. Now I'm going to go through a pathway and a timeline. Now over here, Chinese school start at age 7 for standard 1, 6 years of primary school. You finish in at 12 years old. If you go to another secondary school, public secondary school, Form 1 starts at 13 years old. And so on and so forth, your kids finish university without any hiccup around 22, 23 years old. You see some pros and cons of, as you can see, these are some of the feedbacks that parents have given me over the years. In pros is that you can learn Chinese. Of course, you save money, government funded. But then, they will spend money on tuition. Most families spend on money on tuition and enrichment ECAs, about 1,600 ringgit and above every month. They say they learn Chinese, but remember, exposure is mostly Chinese. So the other subjects, what you don't use, you lose. Those subjects, those other languages, you definitely will see, the child weakening. The shorter schooling hours, it's good or it's bad. Some parents like the short schooling hours because, and then some parents say, no, then it's really disruptive to my work. But, on this point, I just want to tell every parent whose child is going to primary school that your productivity will take a dive because it's just more demands in primary school. Yeah. So, they talk about character building, and some parents, whether, they emphasize confidence and individuality. And then some parents say that, if you go to Chinese school, you have more discipline towards academia because it's very outcome driven. Then they have a very better teachers, unwavering 家长, that means the teaching and parents community. But that's very subject to the national policy flip-flopping. Chinese school teachers value, then it's argumentable because not every school teaches values nowadays. Now, and I'm saying this is last point is a key point because actually for most families, only primary school is relevant in a Chinese school context because there are very few Duzhong, which is a Chinese secondary school nowadays. So most parents are really considering a Chinese primary school for the 6 years of Chinese language learning. Now, this is all good in vacuum, but you need to consider what happens after secondary school. So what happens is that when we go down, most parents will choose a Chinese school. They want to go on to a secondary or maybe a international secondary later on. And that starts around, secondary 1 starts around 11 years old, the year they turn 11 years old. So most families who wants to go on to that path will start to plan for secondary assessment around standard 4, because the child will take the assessment in standard 5. And the assessment for secondary is a lot tougher than assessment at 6 years old or so for when you're looking for primary assessment. So at secondary assessment, you need to make sure the child has kept up the competency in English and math. So meanwhile, the parents will be keeping up the tuition in these subjects because they know that come 2 or 3 years later, they'll be applying for secondary. They want to make sure they keep up the kids' level of competency. So this is one of the key reasons why when we look backwards, we'll be going through primary preparation later on, is why we will prepare for all streams of primary school and keeping and overshooting in terms of math and science, English and Chinese, because this is to help our kids for the next phase of assessment for primary school secondary application. Now, for the SK path is for parents who are looking for a national curriculum. Now, we do have some parents who are considering the SK for primary school. And interestingly, people who choose SK primary for their kids are more likely to choose a public secondary school. Why? I think it's because if you are used to this system and environment, and then you think your kids are done well, I've thrived in this environment, then why not continue in secondary school? Because it's the same, as similar. Whereas I think the parents who go into SKJC, they find that it's a very different from the SK environment. So they are less likely to be considering secondary in the same aspect. Now, so SK, this timeline is a lot more relevant, whereby they start at standard 1 at 7 years old, then they finish standard 6 at 12 years old, and then they continue to form 1, form 5, then after that, they go on to universities. Okay, so then I think that is interesting also, because when we follow up with our SK kids, the parents are less likely to be spending money on tuition. Less likely to be stressed over the exams, performance, and how the kids are doing. They are more likely to be more relaxed about this tuition and etc. Maybe because they are not preparing for a secondary assessment later on and feel like they have to juggle both sides. Private school path is quite similar. People who go into a private school education start standard 1 at 7 years old, finish standard 6 at 12 years old, are more likely to finish the whole primary education there because the parents don't feel like they have to hop on to another boat for secondary. Yes, even if they are, our kids that go on to say KDU for national curriculum in primary school, the parents felt like they could see the progress of the kids and they could understand what's going on. Maybe thanks to the communication from the school, they are more likely to continue in the same national curriculum for secondary. Otherwise, they hop on to a similar international later on somewhere in the same school, same compound. Now, the private school pathway, if you find a private school that is offering like a DRP-like kind of program, chances are your kids are more balanced and more competent in at least 2 of the languages, like English and Bahasa, or like English and Mandarin, etc. So it really depends on what emphasis your private school is placing on, what kind of things, supplements they're offering. International school pathway. This is very interesting because some parents are less familiar with this. Now, international schools start year 1, maybe at 5, maybe at 6. It really depends on the school. And then some international school will finish at year 11. That is their secondary, and they take the IGCSE. Now, some international schools get a full-fledged license. They can offer a pre-U certification, such as the IB or the the A levels. Now, which are the smaller license, or some which are the more full-fledged license? You can see on the school website whether they offer, a pre-U checkpoint like the A levels or the IB, and then you can see. Now, to many parents, it's not really a big point because often, based on scholarships as well, they do move around for the pre-U part of things, or maybe you have shipped your kids off by then. So for them, what is more important is really like maybe in the primary years and maybe up to the secondary checkpoint. Now, for the international school path, I think that especially for some of our children who have who are a little bit more advanced of their year group and they have moved to a different year group faster, they don't really want to repeat the year before going to a national curriculum. So this is a pathway that the parents will, or some parents like the longer hours. So it fits in with the school working hours a lot better. So, and more likely they like they subscribe in the school philosophy and what the school is offering, because you have less of the differentiation when it comes to your national schools. But international schools tend to sell you their flavors, their flavors, and some parents can buy and do the philosophy and the flavors of it. Now, putting them all together, this is a timeline and a comparison. Now, there's quite a big difference in the number of years. Some people say, why rush a kid? I think it really depends on how you value and how you look at time, to start early, to end, or to come out earlier, or to come up to finish school earlier and hop on to your master, etc. And so, or like to save money first and then to invest in later older education. Financially, it makes a difference. If you go through the public school route, even if you factor in like tuition, CCA, and transport costs every day, it still worked out to be a lot cheaper than your international. I mean, there are quite a number of there are over 200 international schools. There are international schools that are 20,000 and below every year. So that is very much more comparable to your public schools. So it really depends on how you think you'll be supplementing your child's education, and then this financial, and work out your financial costs accordingly. And also do find out whether the school, how is their policy in terms of fee adjustment. So we've known of the national school that does a 30% fee hike almost every year or every 2 years, and that's a little bit hard for parents to digest, because it's quite a steep jump. And so some schools are a little bit more, I don't know, we have heard of schools that are more localized, and during the COVID time, they really have been holding the fees for only every 2 years, or incremental change for inflation, etc. So these are more predictable, so it will not be called out later on. And so the next one I'll be going over is on primary school preparation. Now, Swan has done a brilliant job going through this on the program itself. And for me, it's a slightly different perspective on this only, because preparing for primary school, why we designed the pre-primary program, K1, K2 this way, is really because parents, when you choose the school also choose your child. School selection is a two-way street. Yeah. Now, our program for K1, K2 pre-primary is, the subject-wise, let's talk about subject and competency. So for Chinese and Bahasa, we must follow the national curriculum, and we tend to overshoot a little. By the time the kid finish K2, we'll be teaching standard 1 material. Why standard 1? If you follow most of the Chinese kindy, locally, they will, in K2, a Chinese kindy will probably teach until K2. Why do we overshoot to standard 1? It's because of feedback from our parents. There's a lot of adjustment in standard 1. It can be school dependent, teachers' resources are lacking, the class may have no teacher, etc. And during COVID period, it's definitely very, very obvious. So what we do is that we overshoot. Our kids are more confident and prepared. Yeah. And then when they go for their assessment streaming exam in standard 1, when we track our kids, most of them will get into the advanced class. So then parents feel more assured, they feel like there's a bit more peace of mind. So we overshoot in terms of the languages for local curriculum. Now for international curriculum, when we do math and science, we follow the international one for year 1. And by the time they finish K2, we tend to be embarking on year 2 curriculum, because most of our K2 children, when they graduate and they will apply for international school, they're eligible to go into year 2 directly. So a direct entrance into year 2. So we tend to follow the international for English and science, so that our children has a seamless entrance also. Now for Singapore math that we adopt, we follow the Singapore version of the books. So what happens is that in terms of teaching the class, we would follow the Singapore version of it. What happens is that Singapore K2 is a little bit like the year 1/year 2 international curriculum over here. So there's a lot of overshooting, but the kids will just be a lot more, because it's this, how math is the same topic, say decimal or numbers operation. It's just a little bit more complex. So you see that kids are more confident when they are approaching the topic in school. And why? So then we have the so we have this PP and PPE. Let me explain the acronym a little bit. PP is under 12 p.m. We should do our curriculum this way, our program this way. PPE is with enhancement until 3 p.m. We enhance on the languages. So some parents ask me, why do you teach Chinese again? What kind of enhancement? Why? And then, the topics will be similar. Yes, but why does it help? It's very simple, because if you were to, we talked about math earlier, if I'm doing decimal now, but in the afternoon I'm doing decimal again, I'm enhancing it, right? Because I'm giving your child more exposure, more practice. And if you were to hire a tutor for your child, your tutor will be helping your child revise what's taught in school. Why does your child get better? Or to help your child become less weak? It's really because someone is doing it again, teaching again, giving more example, giving more practice, and it just helps a lot. And one of the key reasons why we have the PPE was because we want to empower every child from every family, from every race, to be able to learn the languages. So what happens that we were told over the past is that we're parents who say, oh, I don't know Chinese, but I really want my child to go to Chinese school. So you send back this Chinese homework. I don't know how to help my child do it. In the PPE session, we will help the kids do it, because when they can do it on their own independently, and then we give them a little bit overshooting when they go to primary school next time, they are confident. Okay, and then the parents have the next solution. They have the time to find the next solution to reach it. Okay, so in terms of tenure, now K1 and K2 is 2 years, right? That's 24 months. But our national schools have changed a little bit. Standard 1 doesn't start in January. Standard 1 has been starting in March for the past 2 years. When it's going to change again, not quite sure. Okay, so we have about 24 to 27 months. Okay, so but we tend to finish our pre-primary curriculum in 18 months. So usually around like term 1 of K2, the 5 terms in like K1 of term 2, we would have finished most of the curriculum. Then in April to June of term 2 of K2, we will do a lot of revision. Parents who are in K2 now, of children in K2 now, will tell you, do a lot of assessment, a lot of checkpoints, etc. Why? It's not stressing the kids. It's really a lot of revision and practice of exam skills, because these children here are preparing for entrance exam. It's quite scary. And it's really about having the practice and giving them the confidence. How do you answer like papers, etc.? And then, 3KL is the toughest school to get in. Really, really tough school to get in with is like written exam. So we have 100% acceptance rate into the school. The scariest thing is not the content they are testing on. But right now, I think a lot of our parents will tell us, even when they go to the checkpoints, they see other children crying, or they don't know how to read the instructions. They don't know they're not familiar. It's the exam readiness that they don't have. So what we do is that we make sure that this is incorporated, like primary skills are incorporated into it. So around term 2 of like K2, we start to have these revision exams, etc. So at the end of the term 2, most of our children will get the offer letter of their choice, where they're going to their settled for the international school or the private school bound children. So they will get an offer letter in hand. Then they wait upon the news, the release of their public school posting. Will they get the public school posting of their choice? So that's why in the second half of the year for K2, we go dive deep into the national curriculum. We really shift the focus into like, a lot more on the national curriculum, what the stock of knowledge, and then you help them to prepare for what's in standard 1. So then by the time our children graduate from the pre-primary program, they're definitely very, very empowered for both the national and the international stream. That's why you see our parents, by the time, at the end of K2, they still have the power to choose whether a kid want to go to a national or international school. But you got to choose somewhere somehow. So PPE is really the enrichment program in the afternoon, even though we're doing, say, Sandwich Chinese, is really giving a different perspective and giving more practices and letting the child being able to do on their own. This child here is this lovely Malay boy, family, all Malay, no one speaks Chinese. And then at the end of the PPE program, the parents are like, you know what? I think I'm just going to give it a try. Let's put him in the coaching pool. He's doing really, really, really well now. He's doing really, really well now. I can tell you academically, he's doing really well. And he's still that little cheeky, little smiley, bright boy. And then it's such a lovely, like talking to the parents. But their intention when they put him in there is just give it a try. Okay, here's a list of some of the schools. You can print this, or we'll be sharing this as well. Here's a list of some of the schools that most of our parents apply to. First list on the left, I have your national curriculum, your public schools, your private schools, they are popular. And then the second list are my public Chinese schools that are popular with our families. Let me see. I have to make a special mention of Zhongguo, which is not here, but it's one that parents know that I recommend a lot over the past few years. Zhongguo offered a Singapore national have a different curriculum in the afternoon. So the session is from 7 plus to 4 plus p.m. Some this deters some of the parents, but for working parents, I tell them be practical because you have to look for a daycare in the afternoon. Myself keep in the same school, easier for you to pick up as well. And then most importantly, the second, the afternoon session has really benefited the students during the COVID years. So when we follow with the families, right, what they tell us is that, for most of the Chinese school, because of the flip-flopping and adjustment the curriculum, because of COVID, they take away the exam, they're doing adjustment, etc. They took away the school, they're adjusting the school terms, etc. The school is still finding the footing. But for schools like Zhongguo, because of the English or like Singapore curriculum in the afternoon, it's like steadfast, it's still going on. So the children are still progressing because in the afternoon it's like an enrichment, right? If you're still learning math, but from a different language, and let's say learning science, but from a different language, so your children are still able to keep up with the content they need to learn for every year. And so they have a good, the school also has a good way to assess the progress of the child. So parents feel more assured because they feel like the kids are progressing, the school is more confident. So we have been referring quite a number of children to this school in the past few years. And so like for many of our families, or the working families, they do feel that this is a good arrangement. And most importantly, if you are looking for a different secondary school at the end of primary school, this school keeps your child abreast in English, math, and science. Yes, and then international school have quite a long list here, but it's still a small subset of the 200. Yeah, it's not divided in curriculum, but these are some of the schools that our parents have considered and placed their kids in. Here I have just two short lists of my price tag because this is a very, very real and practical questions. Are there schools that are under around 20K per annum? Yes. But it's a little bit harder to get in, such as 3KL, because there's over application. So if you do think that these are the schools that you're interested in, do consider applying a little bit earlier. ELC and 3KL are very much oversubscribed. Then there are schools between the 20 to 40,000 per annum. So maybe, something to consider if you have less children. Now in primary school, a lot of things happen. Yeah. And I just want to give you just a brief overview first, so that can affect how, what you're very stressed over now may not be so relevant later on. Okay, now some parents in primary school, they realize that, if what you really don't use or you don't study or you don't get in touch with it, kids lose it so fast. That's true. But if they have exposure earlier, like what Natalie said, it's quite easy for them to pick it up later on. Something that you can easily reverse again or change the balance up again. Okay. Now in school, many schools, whether it's national or international, have this expectation that we should all be an all-rounder. You must have 10 subjects, you must be doing well in like this 10 subjects, etc., etc. Then I want you to keep that in perspective because parents will come and tell me, oh, she's doing well generally, but the teachers keep telling me about her Bahasa is very weak. Then she should consider dropping from advanced to intermediate because she's not a strong A. I'm not saying that, this can stress out parents a lot later on. I just say that, this is the school's perspective. You are working with your own child. So, you have other things to balance and to juggle. At the end of the day, when we pull our child because they're not a strong A, are we sending a message that to give up easily or that we're expecting perfection from them? We're not giving them the chance to improve and do better. So I think it's like the parents have to shoulder a little bit of this kind of heat from the school and then try to balance it with the child. Now, then in primary school, we find that a lot of complaints is about weight loss. Kids lose weight really fast. They're not sleeping enough anymore because of the really early hours. And then, or he's still very short, he's still very wet, things like that. What can I do to boost the weight? Or, come and ask me for a recipe again. And what's also really, really real these days, national school or international schools, is that maybe because of screen time exposure, that kind of awareness, bullying happen quite a lot and in different forms. Like the hate notes, the hate letters, etc., can come quite early on. And the boys, the boy you're thinking about, like, oh, pushing you in the schoolyard, etc., kind of a bullying scenario is a lot more evolved nowadays. When we keep track of, with our alumni, it can happen in any type of the schools. And being there and having, like, not too, if you don't outsource your kids too much, then you're able to see changes is where you can catch it a little bit earlier. Now, something that is really important in primary school is the formation of your child's personality, is where it firms up. The view of the world is firmed up. That's where your young adult is formed, not in secondary, but here in primary between 7 to 11 years old. Now, I mentioned earlier, before 7 years old is where they just accept lock, stock, and barrel, like any kind of perspective you just give to them, then they'll just accept it. They'll just accept it. And then you have to address it later on, therapy, etc. But in terms of their own view of the world, their individuality, who they think they are, how confident they are, their self-esteem is formed when they are between 7 to 11. Past this 11, you find that it's really very hard for you to exert your parental influence already. So they are like that young teen adult that you are seeing in secondary, or pre-teen early on. This is the part where in primary you are still able to mold and shape and influence. Now, having said all of this, right? So choosing a primary school, you need to factor in the total price of education, not just the school fees. If you are prepared, you need to be offering tuition. When you send your child to Chinese school, you definitely need Chinese tuition. I know, right? Because it's a lot of Chinese. Whether you know Chinese, you don't know Chinese, you just get a tutor already. And the tutor is the best because instead of sending to another learning center, etc., because then they are catering to your child's own needs and own questions and confusion. And also it will be less time and less hours for your child, a little bit less stressful. Then the other staff will keep up tuition if whatever they think is necessary. Then enrichment activities, because your child has a personality. Maybe she's interested in music, maybe she's interested in your son is interested in soccer, etc. Then you will keep this up. And the other cost, and also the cost on your child's personality, your view of the world, that this to factor in. Some of the common FAQs, such as is there a good and cheap international school? This is not a trick question I think it's a very common question. Now, the cost of running a school, most of it is in the cost of land and then the cost of teachers' wages, right? Now, if you think that a school is dependent on, say, the curriculum, which is set already, the teaching method, which is dependent on teachers, then obviously the quality or how good the school is depends on its teachers. Then is there going to be a good and cheap one? Now, it brings me to the next question. Some parents argue a lot about the local versus a foreign teacher. If I send my kid to international school, he or she must learn good English. But foreign teachers, where are they from? Is it necessary English is the first language? So, and some parents say, oh, I really want my child to be going to somewhere where they're still getting a very Malaysian culture, to be the Malaysian education. I don't mind local teachers, because where else are they going to learn Mandarin and Bahasa if there is no local teachers? So if that's the case, it all helps into contributing to the total cost of running a school. And it also go towards whether you can find a school within your budget. Okay. Now, my child is currently learning very well. Which system will nurture my child the most? Then congratulations, your child, you are better. You have a lot more choices to choose for your child. So some parents, some like me, you have limited choices because maybe you have a child that has certain issues to work with. Some of us know, okay? If your child has just a little bit something more, not as straightforward as some of the kids. So then you need to factor this in as well in choosing the school. Maybe there you have a very, very strong factor that will help you decide on what school. A shorter shortlist. Yeah. But if your child is learning very well, you can go around and visit a lot of schools to enjoy the experience and see which one you like more. Not academic, as which system suit him most. We have that. I just say that, give a child a chance. Yeah. Apart from a hardwired learning issue, many children are able to learn So don't put your child in the box yet. Is tuition the solution? Is tuition solution? Tuition is the insurance, okay, parents? So in the national school or international school, I feel like Malaysian parents love tuition, okay? It's either way, we find the parents like, tuition lah, tuition lah. So, but the good tutor is really hard to find. And hence why some parents may find that, oh, eventually they may send to a learning center because it's really hard to find a good tutor. You cannot monitor the tutor's performance, etc. But when the child is in early primary and they have a day, they come back, you want them to have tuition to make sense of the school, especially if you don't know Mandarin yourself and there's so much homework coming back every day, instead of going to a group tuition or a learning center or daycare center whereby they cater to many kids, probably better to have someone who can help your child on a one-to-one basis. Yeah, because the homework coming back every day could be, I don't know, Chinese and like 数学, that means like math and Chinese, etc. So tutor is able to help your child a little bit more with closer supervision. What happens if my child finishes K2 before 6 years old? Then most likely your child is not eligible for national schools unless you choose to repeat a year. The cutoff differs every year, can be like January 12 or January 14 kind of thing. It really depends on what MOE feel like that year. Okay, why can't my child learn Chinese in international school? Oh, I tell you, I'm still thinking about that today. I think that one of the key factor is in primary school because there's differing checkpoint in secondaries. Let's say we have secondary checkpoint is IGCSE. Yeah, then there is no primary checkpoint. So then what happens is that the teachers will be using their own syllabus. And then worse if they start streaming the children in primary school, advanced, intermediate, beginner for like, foreigners who don't want to learn Chinese, but or they're doing Chinese, is really basic. But all these streamings and individual lesson and there's no checkpoint, how do teacher make up lesson plan? So it becomes an apple to orange. You don't know how each child is really doing, kind of a thing. And the lack of target. So if your child can, really, like if you can keep up the Mandarin standard in primary school, like using a different like checkpoints, say for example HSK YCT, yourself the monitor, you can learn Chinese in secondary school. You just have in international school, you just have to put in more effort because by the time they get to secondary, the textbooks to go the syllabus towards like IGCSE is just a lot more clear cut. And I really beg parents to consider a pathway about learning Mandarin in a longer term. Not just like, oh, I just tahan 2-3 years in primary school or 6 years of primary school. Because if your child graduate with a primary level of like Chinese, is that really, do you really think that's a competent level in the grand scheme of things? So it's really about what is best for you to try to, for your child to have at least about a 10 years competency level and try to graduate with a secondary level of like competency. Now, second language, first language, it doesn't really matter because in the grand scheme of things, you really want your child to be able to communicate, to write, maybe because nowadays there's lots of apps, etc., but to communicate, to understand, and to like the language. How many of you here are picking up Japanese, Korean, and then you learn this because you love this, and it's easy for us to pick it up again, especially we have the past immersion. So do keep it up for your kid if you think that Chinese learning is very important. And I would like to say the same goes for Bahasa, part of the identity. Yeah, so now we have gone through the Malaysian education landscape and about, selecting the school for your child and what happens in primary school. Then, remember what we went through in social development chapter is really about, we need to keep in mind we're raising a child and raising an adult in the future. So then, salt versus sugar, which one should you consume every day? Trick question or not? Yes, it has to be in moderation. Whatever the thing is, some of you are so concerned about, I need to make sure this school, because I want them to keep up with this and that. I want to, and I'm saying that, there's not going to be a school that only put this as a priority for you. And either way, the children will thrive as long as you keep the big picture in mind. You need to remember the adult that you want to raise and nurture, the relationship you want with your child. I want your child to be as close with you when they're adult, like I see them with you now. Yeah. And I want your child to have a strong view, strong self-esteem, like a confident child and a curious child I see today. We talk about parenting style in the social development chapter. Tiger parenting, very outcome driven. Jellyfish parenting is very child driven. Dolphin is more balanced with some structure. Mostly parent driven with some child consensus. A school environment pretty much is a dolphin environment. So then, your parenting style can have an influence on the child's outcome and how the child turns out, but so can the school philosophy. So do choose one that matches your parenting belief. Okay. Now, good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets with planning. So you want a good outcome, start planning for it for your child, and then the rest of it is that you just got to leave it to luck. Okay. Now, so that brings me to the end of the slide. And then with here, I'm leaving you do print screen this or like scan this QR code. I'm opening up next Monday and Tuesday for parental one-to-one sessions. We'd like to prioritize this for parents who are in the midst of selecting a primary school or considering primary school for their kids, or if you have an older kid in primary school and you would like to talk to me about something. So there is a one-to-one session for next Monday and Tuesday. So do scan, do both, and then we hope to see you soon.